It's been a rather tumultuous month for inter-Korean relations as North Korea launched a volley of verbal abuse against the South, then decided to blow up their joint contact office, warning that it was just the start of military action. But the stream of threats have quietened down very recently, and the North's leader Kim Jong-un reportedly suspended a military attack on South Korea. Today, we take a look at these mixed signals from the North, and joining me is Chun In-bum, former Lieutenant General and Commander of the Special Warfare Command of the Republic of Korea Army. We also connect with Doug Bandow, a senior fellow at the Cato Institute, specializing in foreign policy and civil liberties, who was a special assistant to former US President Ronald Reagan. Well, my first question goes to both of you, but why don't we start with you, General Chun? North Korea now, it seems to be backing down from its aggression towards the South. And state media said last week that Kim Jong-un actually decided to suspend plans to take military action against the South. And we also haven't really heard from his sister since. So what do you think really triggered this sudden change of tune?
Well, there's a lot of theories about what's happening, but I think the most predominant is that the North Korean leadership is playing good cop and bad cop. But I think that added to this, that North Korea feels that they've been able to achieve their initial goals, which is to warn the South Korean government and also notify the United States and the rest of the world that they're willing to go to the extremes to meet their goals. And that message has already been provided. So I think they feel that they've reached that goal and they're doing this. But the point is that it's not over and it could turn at any point.
So you believe that the North Koreans believe they got their message across. Well, Dr. Bandow, what do you think? What do you think caused this sudden change of heart in the North Korean regime?
It certainly could have been planned from the start. Rev up the tensions, get the world's attention, in a sense, warn everyone what North Korea could do. And then Kim Jong-un can step forward and show that, in fact, he's a man of peace. He really doesn't want to have a conflict. My guess is that they're really making a play for Donald Trump. They would like to get something from him possibly before the election. So they want to be careful how far they increase tensions. This certainly has suggested, even to the U.S., the North could do something else. It could use military action. It can do missile or even a nuclear test. So I suspect that is a sense. They've got their message across. This presents Kim Jong-un as someone who ultimately is reasonable and willing to deal if you give him something. And we'll see where they go from here.
Well, General Chun, if North Korea does decide to escalate things, what kind of actions do you think could come from the regime if they do decide to take some kind of military action?
Well, Pyongyang usually does what they say they will do. So they've already threatened that they will nullify the comprehensive military agreement with 4 major measures, which is the redeployment of combat troops to the Kaesong and Kumgang area, to redeploy to the GPs that were destroyed, conducting leaflet operations as well as broadcasts, and most dangerously conducting military activity along the MDL, the military demarcation line, and the northern limit line. Having said that, I'm quite concerned that major parades are in preparation right now, and they could exhibit mobile ICBM launchers, which is an indication of ICBM capability. And also maybe they will demonstrate exhibit a SLB, submarine-launched ballistic missile capability submarine. So these kind of exhibits could also be a part. Finally, this is the most dreaded scenario for me, is cyber attacks and even a nuclear weapon demonstration. So these activities that the North Koreans can conduct are very dangerous, and it's not just a Korean Peninsula problem.
Well, General Chun, recently, President Moon Jae-in's special advisor, Moon Jung-in, said that the North Koreans have probably read the recently released book by John Bolton, which does express very great criticism and skepticism regarding US-North Korea talks on denuclearization. And he said that it's very likely that Pyongyang is now rather pessimistic about making progress on resuming discussions. Would you agree with what he said?
Well, we all knew that denuclearization was going to be difficult. Some people had higher hopes, but people like myself knew that this was not going to be easy. So, what Mr. Bolton has said comes as no surprise. To me, I find that North Korea fully understands the mechanisms of a democratic system, and they know the weaknesses of an open society, and yet they do not understand the strength of a free society. So hopefully they will not take into full the comments of Mr. Bolton on its whole, but look at the whole picture and the mechanism.
And Dr. Bandow, looking back on the Hanoi summit, do you think that the two US-North Korea summits that were held by President Trump and Kim Jong-un, do you think they proved to be more harm than good? Do you think they could have perhaps been done better?
Well, they certainly could have been done better. I think President Trump deserves credit for having tried negotiation and engagement. The problem is this is a president who doesn't do the hard work that's necessary. This is someone who is focused, I think, on photo opportunities and for the illusion of progress and not serious hard negotiation. Previous policies had failed. Trying to open a new, have a new opening with North Korea, I think was useful, but they certainly could have been done much better. We're in a situation today where we're essentially back to where we were. We're seeing some of the same rhetoric. And I agree with the general that the real danger is if they decide to do an ICBM or nuclear test, that will be a challenge not just to the Republic of Korea, that will be a challenge to the United States. If it's done in the middle of a presidential campaign, it's going to create a very unpredictable reaction from this administration.
Well, Bolton's book also mentions how President Trump questioned the presence of US troops in South Korea. And while the two countries, they've been unable to agree on defense cost sharing for months, for instance, and they've also had conflicts in trade. So, General Chun, how important do you think it is for the South Korean and US leaders to reaffirm the strength of their alliance in responding to North Korea? And what do you think that the two parties could actually do to improve their political cooperation?
Well, I think before I answer that question, that I think the Korean listeners and probably the rest of the world need to understand that the United States is not just negotiating with Korea alone on stationing costs for their troops. It's many, many countries. Korea is one piece. And having said that, I just want to reiterate that we Koreans have been pretty fair in our contribution and are willing to expand this contribution because U.S. troops is beyond, monetary value. They are very valuable to us. Going directly to your question, I feel that so far Mr. Trump and Mr. Moon have done a pretty good job of showing solidarity. My main question is this solidarity message going to continue? I hope that it will. But it's more than Mr. Trump and Mr. Moon. Again, it's more than just administrations because a democratic country always has the possibility of changing the party. So I'm happy with what I've seen between Trump and the Moon administration, but I'm a little bit concerned that there might be some friction, and I hope that both leaders can show a strong stand and message against North Korean denuclearization and other affairs.
What would you have to say about that, Dr. Bandow? Do you think the two leaders are going to continue to cooperate? I mean, with the US elections coming up as well in November, how do you think that will change the way that the US's North Korea policy is done?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that there, in a sense, are two governments making policy. There's the president, and there's essentially the rest of the foreign policy establishment. So certainly Secretary Pompeo and others, the defense secretary and national security advisor, these are people who generally, I think, are quite committed to the alliance. The president has been a skeptic of the alliance with South Korea for many, many years, as well as with NATO. These are sentiments that he had well before he ran for president. So I think that's much more unpredictable. He likes to have personal relationships with leaders. He seems to have gotten along reasonably well with President Moon, though I don't think that he views President Moon as his favorite leader. He's certainly Erdogan of Turkey. There are others out there that the president seems to like more for very strange reasons. So I think a lot here is he looks at these relationships much more as a transaction than as an enduring alliance, like many others. So if he's reelected, I think this will be an issue in the future. He's not been happy so far with the outcome of the SMA negotiations. Others in the administration would be very happy to bring it to a close and make the agreement. So the president is a wild card here. If he is reelected, and that's the critical issue, it could be a much more difficult year next year, just given his personality and what he views as whether he thinks America is getting a fair deal.
So he has been and always will be somewhat of a wild card. And, well, Dr. Bandow, until now, the US has tried strategic patience and also a policy of maximum pressure and, well, President Trump's own personal means of appeasing the North Koreans. But what do you think needs to be done differently this time to deal with a figure like Kim Jong-un?
Well, my view is the North Koreans are not going to give up their nuclear weapons, and quite honestly, they would be stupid to do so. Why would they trust the United States? I think that, unfortunately, Libya, if nothing else, would convince them of that. Muammar Gaddafi gives up his nuclear weapons and missile program, and at the moment he's vulnerable. The U.S. and Europeans worked very hard to take him out, and he died a very unpleasant death. I have no doubt that the North Koreans have seen the YouTube video of what happened to him. I think we need to approach this as, are there smaller deals that we can make that can reduce the North Korean nuclear threat? Can we get inspectors in? Can we get them to dismantle Yongbyon? Can we try to cap their program? What kind of guarantees might we get on nonproliferation? And the question is, what kind of deals then would require relief from sanctions or other measures? Look at conventional weapons, pullback of artillery and other things. I would approach it that way, try to make changes that the North Koreans would view as advantageous for them, but the U.S. and the ROK would view as reducing instability, making a more peaceful peninsula, and move us ultimately toward denuclearization if we ever thought we could get there, but be realistic as we move along the way. That's a wonderful goal, but let's see what we can get as interim agreements on the way.
And finally, General Chun, how do you think South Korea should, what do you think should be South Korea's approach towards handling the North?
Well, more than anything else, we should never give in to intimidation or threats by North Korea, especially on the military side, because there will be no limit to that kind of intimidation tactics from North Korea. So I think we should stand firm, and more than anything else, our alliance with the United States, military alliance especially, needs to be firm. There needs to be no doubt as to the commitment by the United States and by the South Korean government to the security of the Korean Peninsula.
Well, this is where we'll have to wrap up the show today. That was Chun In-bum, former Lieutenant General and Commander of the Special Warfare Command of the Republic of Korea Army, and Doug Bandow, a senior fellow at the Cato Institute, specializing in foreign policy and civil liberties. Thank you both so much for joining us and starting your week with us.
Thank you.
This is also where we wrap up the show. Thank you for watching.